Hi and welcome to my channel. I'm Simon and today I am back with my April reading wrap up. So I was going to say all the books that I read in April, but I have not one but two confessions that will come at the end of this video. So there's that. Anyway, I'm going to get cracking with what I read in April. It was a really good month. It was quite intense because of the Women's Prize longlist to shortlist and reading a lot of those. So I have talked about some of these books before. Speaking of which, there are three books that I'm not going to be talking about, and they are these three, which are Fire Rush by Jacqueline Crooks, Black Butterflies by Priscilla Morris, and Trespasses by Louise Kennedy, because they are up for the Women's Prize and I don't want to spoil my order of preference of those before me and Mum record our predictions of the winner, our personal winners, but also we tend to do that in order of preference. Well, we do because our winner is our favourite, and that's that, and that's the end of it. So I don't want to give anything away before we record that, and so I'm going to leave you on a little bit of tenterhooks there, like I did with the tease of what on earth it is. I'm going to confess at the end of this video, but I'm going to go through them in order that I read them, roughly, according to Storygraph, starting with Friendaholic by Elizabeth Day, Confessions of a Friendship Addict. I read this for an event that I was hosting. I don't like that term. I read this for an event where I was in conversation with Elizabeth, but I would have read it anyway because I adore her and she's a friend. And this book was brilliant. Friendship is a subject matter that I find a little bit triggering because a lot like just any relationship, it always sort of baffles, bothers, bewilders, and makes me mildly anxious. I wanted something that began with B then, but I couldn't find it, sorry. Because you never really know what the other person is thinking or how they really feel about you. And it's just something that really, really sort of, it can make me quite anxious. This really helped because it's not only Elizabeth talking about her addiction to friendship and where that came from and how it has got to a point where it's maybe a little bit out of control, and how people pleasing becomes part of that equation. Kind of that thing about anxiety and not knowing what other people really think. All of that is here, but it's also told with some snapshots from different people about their friendships, as well as some of Elizabeth's friends who talk about their friendship, but also their thoughts on friendship, which are a whole spectrum of different opinions on friendship and how many friends people should have and what friendship means. And I just thought it was absolutely ace, and also just a real celebration of friends and friendship too. So I would highly recommend this. I thought it was ace, but I think all of Elizabeth's books are ace. I've been on record saying that several times. Then the first of the Women's Prize long-listed books that didn't make the shortlist that I read was Wandering Souls by Cecile Penn. Now, this book is so beloved, and I can totally, I'm trying to get it to focus, I can totally understand why, and I can see how powerful and poignant people think it is, because this book did make me weep. It's about three siblings, Anne, Tam and Min, and it's how they leave Vietnam during the war. I think it might be after the Americans are leaving after the war, and they they want to escape to America via Hong Kong, and they're going, the family is separated and they're the first three to go. However, no spoiler to let you know that the rest of the family don't make it. And so these three orphans have to try and make it kind of not just in the world, but in so many different worlds, because they first of all have to make it at a camp for refugees. Then they, instead of being headed out to America, which is the original plan, they are sent to Britain, which in the 1980s was Thatcher's Britain and was not a particularly welcoming place. And the finding out about the politics and what some thoughts on this crisis were was quite eye-opening, possibly unsurprising, but quite eye-opening, and really made me feel comfortable. But there's just so many brilliant elements in this book. For example, this story of this young woman who is having to become a basically parent to her sibling and survive, along with both her siblings surviving. That's a big part of it, and the unity and the bond they have because of that, and how that may or may not fracture as things go on. But also we have this, I didn't think it was going to work for me. It's the voice of one of their younger siblings who dies and kind of is this sort of spectral voice in the background watching over them. I thought that was done brilliantly. The only bit that didn't work for me was that there is a voice generationally further down the line, so more in the present day, that felt very journalistic, and sometimes that broke the spell for me. And I don't know if that was intentional, that they had more of a journalistic slant on it. I think it kind of was, but yeah, it was just more factual and a bit, I don't know, it lacked a slight emotional link that I needed, or a hook, whereas the other elements really, really got me. I mean, this book made me cry quite a few times, but at the same time, that tiny little bit. And there was also some parts of the book that looked at what's happened more recently, and again, heartbreaking, but that felt heartbreaking at, oh my goodness, I didn't know that story way, rather than the emotional tone of that part of the book. So yeah, this for me, corking debut. I cannot wait to see what she writes next. But yeah, I had like that tiny little bit that I just didn't quite get on with. A book that I completely emotionally connected with is a picture book by Amerie, who I adore, and I will link her channel down below. And if you're not part of her book club, you should be. This is illustrated by Reza Figueroa, and this is just wonderful. It's just a book about empowering young people to say you will do great things, and just the images and the wording are fantastic. It's just a really, really beautiful book, and I've loved Amerie since It's This One Thing That Got Me Tripping, and this book had me tripping just with delight because I just thought it was so fantastic. So yeah, there we go. And also, random fact, I ended up on an American talk show when Amerie was promoting this, celebrating Amerie's book club. So there we go. That was a lovely thing to happen in April. And I should say it was one of my favourite things, although I forgot to include it in my monthly favourites over on Patreon. So whoops-a-daisy. Then another book from the Women's Prize long list that didn't get shortlisted. And I've done a whole video on this book. It's The Bandit Queens by Parini Shroff, and I absolutely chuffing loved it. And I'll link that video down below if you want 15 minutes of why you should read this book, because it's so blinking brilliant. But one thing that I kind of feel like I shouldn't have said in that video was that, oh, it's a shame it didn't get shortlisted, because it's almost like saying, oh, the other books didn't deserve to. They all did. Also, I do think sometimes we get a little bit hung up and a little bit angry about books that don't make it onto the shortlist when we have no control over that whatsoever. And actually, as someone who is judging prizes and has judged prizes, it's a really hard decision, and it isn't done lightly, and also just everyone's taste is so different. So yeah, anyway, what's this about? It's about a woman called Geeta, who rumours in the village she lives in, rural India, are that she killed her husband, who has vanished off the face of the earth. And she does not refute these rumours, because there is a certain power in being feared, especially as a woman in her mid-30s. There's also the fact that it stops any societal pressures being put on her, because people just leave her alone. And also there is a certain freedom in being feared and being left alone. Yes, there is loneliness. Yes, you can feel a bit out of the loop and a bit of an outsider, but there are certain powers to that, which I'd never thought about before, and this book really made me think of that. It also, with having an incredible wryness and snark and a real propulsion, looks at some really dark themes, such as domestic violence. It looks at societal, how people perceive people, whether they are rich or not, what caste they're from, all those things. And at the same time is, and I annoyingly forgot to say this in the video, beautifully written, as well as being really pacey. And the characters are so vivid. But it's also a book about friendship, and it's about how, for the greater good, you can, well, greater good, murdering husbands, we'll see. But how, for the benefit of others, you can come together with people who you don't agree with, who you may even dislike. And yet it also looks at friendship and how friendships can change. So it's just packed with so much, and it's one of my favourite books of the year. I've said that before, I'll say it again. You'll see me talking about this again, I'm sure, when I do my books of the year so far at the end of next month. So yeah, I thought that was a cracking book, and it felt so assured as well, which I really, really loved. The voice was just really, really assured. Then, sadly, a book I didn't get on with next, and this is a book that I had such high hopes for. It was probably the one on the long list that I was sort of most excited about reading, and that's Cursed Bread by Sophie Mackintosh. And the blurb, and this is one of the reasons that I really struggle with blurbs and they make me a little bit cross, was very much about how this is about the case of, well, it's based on a official happening, factual happening, a historical happening, a happening where in a small town or village in France, everyone was poisoned by the bread. Now, to me, I was like, well, this is going to be a really dark gothic gem and I'm going to get totally into it. It sounds really weird and bonkers. And it had some weird and bonkers moments in it. There's one around a bonfire, there's one around some dead horses. There's some moments and the tension does build up as it goes. However, what it's really about is Eloise, the wife of the baker, and there's quite a lot of I don't know, I found baking quite sexy when I was reading this book. That's something that I got out of it. I don't know if it's all the pummeling or what. Anyway, I digress. But it's really about this woman who becomes absolutely obsessed with a woman called Violet and her husband who moved to the village, and she's kind of obsessed about her having sort of intimate relationships with Violet having intimate relationships with her husband, with Violet having intimate relationship with Elodie's own husband, with Violet's husband having, you get the gist. It's all about trysts. Oh, and that was almost a rhyme. And I just struggled with the repetitive nature of that. It kind of, I was going to say it's a slow burn, but it's a short book, so I felt like it should have had a little bit more propulsion to it. However, I think if I'd been pitched it as a book about desire, isolation, loneliness, and sexual obsession, I probably would have enjoyed it a lot more. So I think the blurb has something, it's to do with the blurb, I think. I felt like I was missold this book. But then maybe I missold it to myself and just focused on the one bit that I thought I'd really like. But we do that, don't we, when we pick up books? So anyway, also, I think maybe, no disrespect to Sophie Mackintosh at all, but I feel like she's just not my kind of writer. It's the second book of hers I've read that I haven't quite got on with. And that's not a personal thing. It's just how it is. And that happens with certain books. But I am still really annoyed that I didn't get this book as much as I wanted to, because I thought it was going to be absolutely one of my favourite books of the year. And yeah, it wasn't, sadly. Then onto a book that had a really kind of almost polar opposite response, or I had a polar opposite response to than Cursed Bread, and that is Pineapple Street by Jenny Jackson. Now, this is the UK edition. I have to say, I don't think this cover does this book any favours. Yes, it's got the New York skyline on it, but it's called Pineapple Street and it's got an orange. And I get that the orange is unravelling and characters do in this book, but still, I actually think the American version, which I had imported, is much better. I mean, look at that. I think that is gorgeous. So this book is about three sisters. Well, one is a sister-in-law. We have Sasha, who is married into this very wealthy, rich family based in Brooklyn. I should also say this book was a book that I accidentally read for my April Savage prompt, which was to read a book set in your favourite city, and New York and Brooklyn are one of my favourite places in the entire world. And so this was a book I was also meant to be reading for an event with Jenny Jackson, which sadly got cancelled. I was even more good because I wanted this one signed because I loved the book and love this. I've just given away that I love the book, but I did love the book. But at first I wasn't sure. So we have Sasha, who, like I said, is married into this family, and her husband has two sisters. Now, I want to get the names right, because Darlie, I kept thinking that she was called Darcy the whole way through it, but Darlie, who she's chosen to pass all of her money on to her children, and so it's, how her lifestyle is based around how the work that her husband does and the work that she used to do. So we have Darlie, and then we also have Georgina, who's working for a non-profit because she's got all of the money that, well, not all of her inheritance, but she's got, allowance, and she's working for a non-profit, and she has fallen for a man at work. And we follow these three women who have a really odd dynamic at first. And I have to say, at first I was like, nothing is happening. They just don't like each other. Yeah, okay, we're getting to meet Sasha, who's married into this family, and she's really struggling with it because she's an independent woman, but she's lost her independence because they kind of control everything going on. I feel like I've read that before. Then we have Dahlia, a woman who's given everything away, and then something happens which causes loads of stress because maybe she can't have the lifestyle she's accustomed to. And then we have a young girl falling in love with an older man. And then halfway through, everything kind of switched and I started to absolutely love it. I mean, I must have loved it before halfway through, or enjoyed it before halfway through, because I was definitely wanting to carry on. But I just got completely and utterly engrossed in their lives. I haven't decided how I feel about how it all resolves itself, if that's the right term. But I think if you're looking for something that's like a smart, intelligent, funny often, I mean, honestly, Dahlia's children, who at one point are obsessed with death to very funny, embarrassing results, and also are obsessed with the fact they were both sperm at one point, just absolutely brilliant. I could have had probably a lot more of that. And actually, I think if anything, I would have liked more of this book, because I just wanted more of the dynamic and more of the family. And yeah, I just thought it was brilliant. So yeah, really, really enjoyed it. But like I said, still, I mean, on about the ending. But I won't say any more from that because I don't want to spoil it for anyone. But yeah, if you fancy giving it a go, do. Then, probably the book, if I'm really honest, I was least looking forward to reading from the Women's Prize longlist was The Dog of the North by Elizabeth Mackenzie. And this is because, in part, I think the cover is utterly, like, I don't know, it's saccharine, it's a bit twee, that's not very me. Although let's just have a moment for the end papers, which, if there was a suit in this pattern, I would wear it. So there we go. And also, I had read The Portable Veblen, her previous novel, which was also listed for the Women's Prize, and didn't really get on with that one. I thought the comedy in it was a bit try hard. But that's also, I should say, no offence to Elizabeth Mackenzie, because funny books I don't generally get on with. Funny books I just don't find funny. This one did tickle my funny bone on occasion, but I will say I was tempted to DNF it at first, because it's all about a woman called Penny who's split up from her husband. She decides to get away because there's something going on with her grandmother and she's going to help out there. She ends up randomly staying in a family friend's office that he's also sleeping in. He has awful stomach problems, and the comedy that ensues didn't really work for me. However, when we then meet the grandmother, I love I should say, I'm not mentioning, speaking of grandmothers, Demon Copperhead either, because obviously that's on the Women's Prize shortlist. Sorry, I forgot that I read that sort of March into April and throughout April. So yeah, anyway, where was I saying? Yeah, so grandmothers, because there's a great grandmother character in that book. We get to her grandmother's, who doesn't want to leave the house, who may or may not have dementia. She's quite confused. And once they get her out, not only do they find like baby rats and all sorts in this hoarding property, they also find something that made my jaw drop. And I was like, oh, okay, I need to read more. And I did. And I'm glad I did. I do feel like, and this might sound like a daft thing to say, and I've said it before, so this proves me daft a few times if it is a daft thing to say, that this book felt like it didn't really know where it was going, and again didn't really live up to the premise that was pitched for it. But I definitely kind of overall enjoyed the reading experience. I did feel sometimes like I just don't really get why all of this is happening or what's going on, or whether this would, I don't know, there were just moments where I was a bit like that about it, but I did enjoy it a lot more than I expected to. So if you are wanting to give this a whirl, give it a whirl, because there's some gasping moments and there are a few giggles. I giggled a couple of times, so there we go. It clearly got my funny bone. Then we have Children of Paradise by Camilla Grudova, which I hadn't heard of before. I had heard of her short story collection. It is somewhere on these shelves here. I think it's called The Doll's Alphabet, and I do really, really want to go and read that at some point soon. This is set in a cinema called The Paradise, and Holly, who has come to the UK from where we slowly get insights to where she's come from, knows no one and goes to work in this cinema which is full of outsiders who she feels like may accept her, but she remains an outsider for a while and looks at what it's like to be an outsider on the outside of outsiders, or be othered by othered people. Eventually she does sort of befriend them, and then gothic, dark, quite nasty in parts things happen. This kind of has a feel of horror about it in some ways. I enjoyed this. I do feel it got a bit too much towards the end, without any spoilers, but I just found the darkness sort of, I don't know, took over, and not necessarily in a way that was particularly, well, it wasn't particularly satisfying for me. I felt there was a few cliches as well towards the end. And I think what was interesting is when each of the chapters is named after a film, and when I knew the film, I got the reference to what the book was talking about. When I didn't, I totally didn't. So, for example, there's a chapter called Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, which is a film I absolutely love. It's one of my favourite films. And Iris, who works at cinema, we soon discover has this kind of Baby Jane-ness about her. And that I thought was brilliantly done. But then there were other chapters where I was like, I have no idea how to reference this to that film. And I think maybe that works against the book occasionally. You may disagree. I mean, it's certainly given me a list of films that I want to go and watch, but I feel like this is for real film buffs. You'll get like loads of extras out of it. It's a great book. Well, no, it's a very good book without, if you don't get those riffs, but I think it could be a really great book if you did get all of the nods. So we have that one. Then I went to Bronte land in North Yorkshire, and while I was at the parsonage, I wanted to pick up a book from there, and so I got, oh, there we go, this little black Penguin classic, which is The Night is Darkening Around Me, which is some of her poetry, because Tom Reads Things, who I absolutely adored, I haven't heard of him for ages, but I absolutely adored him, raved about her poetry. Now, I don't know what was going on with this selection, but it was flipping bleak. And it was very much centered around death. And actually, Mum and I had been saying when we went to the parsonage how like death was literally all around them, because literally it was on a graveyard, but also there was like so much death at the time around everybody. And that definitely seeps into this work. So yeah, I found some of it quite haunting, but I would only say like how many are there in here? I can't even remember. But I think only like 4 or 5 of them really, really resonated with me. And I think there's like, oh, there's quite a lot. I mean, here we have one poem just called Death That Struck When I Was Most Confiding. Yeah, it's quite a lot of darkness. Well, that would suit the title, wouldn't it? The night is darkening around me. But this felt like death is darkening around me, and things are quite... So, yeah, but it's... Yeah, because Emily wrote... Oh God, this is going to be really embarrassing. Emily wrote Wuthering Heights, which I didn't really love. I'm a big fan of Jane Eyre, but what going to the parsonage did make me want to do is read loads more Bronte. So that's something that maybe I will do over the autumn. I'd quite like to head to some big, gothic, chunky beasts. The Bronte beasts of autumn? No, let's not call it that. Anyway, then, last of the long-listed books that I hadn't read before April was Homesick by Jennifer Croft. And this book has got such an interesting history, which I know has been talked about a lot on BookTube, so I feel like I don't really need to say that much more about it. But the fact that originally it was published in Spanish, then it was translated into English in America as a memoir with photos, and then was turned into a novel, and the novel has been, well, was longlisted for the prize. It's just quite an interesting roller coaster. It tells of sisters Zoe and Amy, and they are really, really close to the point where like loads of the time they get on, but also sometimes they don't. And there's things that kind of, or people that come into the book that sort of test their relationship in different ways. They start keeping secrets from each other. However, Zoe becomes ill, and it's how that, along with a shocking event, kind of how the ripples of those things affect their relationship, and also the relationship really with their parents. I found the book a mixed bag. I would have loved, I think, to read the memoir version of this with the pictures, which I may at some point do in like 5-10 years or whatever. I can't imagine doing it in the same year that I've read the novel, really. But there were some incredibly emotional scenes in this book, and it's also like my sort of thing because a lot of it is quite vignette-y, so you might have a chapter that's just a page, and that gives it kind of a condensed, concise power, I guess, within the text. But I felt like as it went on, it just slowly petered out and lost its way a little bit for me, and so the emotional impact changed. And yeah, I thought it was a good book, and I'm really intrigued, actually, having read this, to go on and read the books that Jennifer Cross has translated. I think that will be, did I say Jennifer Cross? Jennifer Croft has translated. I think that would be really, really interesting to do. But also, I just want to read more books from Charco Press, and I will read whatever Jennifer Croft writes next. But I think at some point I would like to go to the memoir. I think that would just have more of an emotional, give me more of an emotional wallop. Occasionally I just felt a bit lost here sometimes. I'm not quite sure why, but I did. But there weren't any dub books on the long list for me. Like, even though I feel like I've given Cursed Bread a bit of a kicking over the last few weeks, and even though I had a very odd relationship with Pod, which I think I'm going to reread for before the winner is announced, I don't think there's a bad book on there. There's just a couple of books that weren't necessarily for me, and that's what's so interesting about prizes, and again why I feel like we shouldn't get angry if a book isn't shortlisted, because, you know, it's up to the judges, and that's a tricky thing for them. Anyway, penultimately, no, actually, well, yeah, it is kind of penultimate because there is another book I want to talk about for the first of my confessions. But the last book that I finished in April was Richard E. Grant's A Pocketful of Happiness. And I think I can say, and I think I've hinted at it in other videos, that I am going to be hosting Sky Arts from Hay, and one of my guests is going to be Richard. So I've been reading up on his works. He's got 3 memoirs and 1 novel. And this was the first of his books that I read. And this is a beautiful, yet brutally beautiful memoir about the diagnosis of his wife's terminal illness, and then leading on from that up to her death. And it's so honestly written that sometimes you have to like look away because it's really intimate. Also, as someone who has cared for someone when they're terminally ill, with my granddad to a degree, but particularly with my gran, the honesty and rawness in here, just, it really, I can't say chime because it's a different situation, but the fact that at some points you love each other so much more condensedly in these moments because you know time's running out, but also, boy, do you get on each other's nerves. And I really appreciated the way that Richard wrote that. It's not a detriment to him or his wife, it's just factual. Things get tense, it's a really difficult time, there is lots of laughter, there are lots of tears, but there's also some moments where you're just really annoyed, not necessarily even with each other, you're angry at the situation, and all of that is covered in here. And what I think is brilliant about this book is that as we go through the month leading up to his wife's death, I felt like the way he, and I should say his wife's called Joan, sorry, I felt like the way he also celebrated their relationship from when he meets Joan and how their dynamic was at the start and how it kind of built, I just thought was brilliantly done. There is just a real rawness here, and Richard actually says in this book he doesn't like secrets and he doesn't keep any from you. So you kind of go through also what's going on with him in terms of his career. We look at Spice World, which I'm obsessed with the Spice, well, not obsessed, but I love the Spice Girls, so I love that bit. But also Can You Ever Forgive Me, which I then went and watched and thought was absolutely brilliant, and he is fantastic in it. And yeah, and then at the same, and that alternation I just think is brilliantly done because it provides a break from the just pure emotion to yeah, it's a really, I think that's done really, really well, basically, is what I wanted to say. I just said that really badly, and Richard, if you do see this, I'm really sorry if I've worded that dreadfully. I promise I'll be better when we meet. But yeah, so I just thought this was great, really, really great. And I think grief is something we do not, well, death and grief are things that we don't, he says, after having said, frankly, Emily banged on about it a little bit too much in this, but I do think it's something we don't talk about as a society enough. It's the only one guarantee that we all have in life. Well, two, I guess, because we all know we're going to die, but also we are going to lose people. And I think it is something that we should be talking about more. And so that I would very much recommend. Now, on to a confession, because in my Instagram picture, I took that photo before I then travelled and put it on Instagram on the 1st of May, because I wanted it to be like really on time, says the man who's put his What I Read in April video up, well, past the middle of May. But I had included The Age of Innocence, sorry, let's hold that here, in that photo, because I was going to read this for my April prompt, and also because Richard is in an adaptation of The Age of Innocence, which I love, but also have slight difficult memories of, because before we went to see it, I can't remember how old I was, but I was running, I used to have a dog that lived next door, and we would run along the garden and sort of have a race, and at the end I tripped and grazed all of my cheek off, and I remember being sat through the film just having my cheek really tightening whilst it was coming over. That's a nice image for you all. Anyway, it's got Michelle Pfeiffer in it, who I absolutely love, and yeah, I wanted to read this because also it was set in New York. However, I didn't get around to it. I read the first few pages, but then I was like, no, I haven't actually read the part in Richard's other memoir, With Nails, where he's in the film, and I wanted to read that first before I read this. So I accidentally fibbed because I tried to be over-prepared and on time. And what does that teach us? Don't force yourself to do anything if you don't have to. There is no rule saying that I have to post a picture of what I read in April bang on the 1st of May as a new month comes in. It's just daft. So yeah, so that's confession number 1. Confession number 2 is that over the last few months, including towards the end of last year, I have been reading books that I haven't been talking about, and they are the submissions for the Royal Society of Literature's Christopher Bland Prize. And as I'm filming this on Monday, we have just chosen our shortlist, so that will be coming out next week. I had to read all the submissions to create a shortlist, but there isn't a long list, and obviously if you're judging a prize, you don't talk about submissions that aren't longlisted or shortlisted, because it just wouldn't be the way. I mean, I may have sneaked a few in along the way, who can say, but some were quite different, and are quite different on the shortlist actually to what you might think I would read, so I felt that would be a little bit obvious. But that list is coming, and I will do a video on those 6 books if you would like me to in the weeks ahead. So there we go. Forgive me, viewers, for I have sinned twice in a bookish way that I can think of recently. There's probably other ways that I've sinned in all sorts of ways. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for joining me. It's always a treat to chat to you. Let me know in the comments below what your favourite book of April was. Let me know if you read any of these and what you thought of them. And let me know maybe what you're planning on reading, or I was going to say planning on reading in May. We're over halfway through, but let me know if there's anything that's been an absolute corker so far this May, and leave me an emoji of what's something very April-y. I mean, I was going to say these tulips here, which are gorgeous. Leave me actually an emoji of an orange or a pineapple in the comments below if you got this far. And if you want to check out my Instagram, my Patreon, my Twitter, my wishlist, anything like that, that's all linked down below. If you want to subscribe, that'd be lovely. And if you want to give this a thumbs up, and if you want to give this a thumbs up because you liked it, that'd be blinking lovely of you. And I will see you in another video very, very soon. Bye.